Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Corruption Forum. Before beginning, I would like to ask everybody to join me in a round of applause for our organizers, Carlos Varga and Sylvia Fucek. Without their help and assistance, we would never have this. My name is Jeff Everett, and I'm an associate professor of accounting in the Haskayne School of Business. My talk today is entitled Corruption, Definitions, Problems, and Solutions. My talk stems from research that myself and others undertook a while back that started from a rather simple question. Are accountants taking any concerted action against corruption? And if so, what does that action look like? Our most basic finding is that no, there is little concerted effort on the part of accountants, though there is most certainly a lot of work in the area of fraud prevention. In fact, very little mention is even made of the term corruption by accountants, and a little later I'll suggest some reasons as to why this is the case. At any rate, I'm not going to be talking about accounting today, which should please many of you, those in the crowd who are not accountants. However, if you are interested in the accounting side of things, please see me afterwards, and I can provide you with some references to some of the research that myself and my colleagues have been doing, as well as some other things that may be of interest to you. What I will be focusing on today specifically is how corruption is typically framed and understood in the academic literature, how it is defined, and the type of solutions being posed. I think this literature is important because a number of organizations fighting corruption, such as the World Bank and the IMF, highlight this research in their anti-corruption documents and materials, and presumably they use some of this research in their policy formulation process. I'll also discuss what I see as the limitations of this research, and will offer another alternative way of defining and understanding corruption, one that connects with the moral connotations that the term corruption elicits. First, the existing research on corruption. We began our investigations by first trying to understand exactly what is meant by the term corruption. It might come as no surprise that the term has numerous and vague meanings. The term is also associated with a variety of different acts. We counted no less than 64 in our efforts to understand what this term actually meant. Despite the vagueness of the definitions and the large number of acts that the term denotes, corruption is understood in a fairly specific way, at least theoretically, and that is an act involving a self-interested agent whose actions have specific consequences. This accords with what is widely known as agency theory, an important perspective in political science and in especially economics. Indeed, so pervasive is this framing of corruption that I would say it is the orthodox way of understanding the term. The term orthodox connotes a sense of religious belief and also a sense of conservative politics. And this is no mistake, a point I'll return to later. Often the consequences of concern to those doing research in this field is the manner in which corruption affects and/or undermines economic growth or other economic-related outcomes. This research then reflects the Oxford Dictionary's first definition of corruption, which is related to money and other forms of personal gain. In addition, this research positions members of the public sector or public officials as being central in the discussion and problematization of corruption. Here, for instance, we see a definition provided by the World Bank. More recent definitions are reducing this focus on public officials, but they are still common. We can say that much of the current concern with corruption is focused on public officials, politicians, police, judges, and other public servants. This concern is no doubt justified. For example, Indonesia's Mohammed Suharto kept the equivalent of at least $15 billion US worth of wealth for himself and his family. Zaire's Mobutu Seko was no less inclined to skim funds for himself and those around him to the tune of some $5 billion US. The Philippines' Ferdinand Marcos proved no less able to enrich himself, though admittedly one can understand the efforts one must go to ensure that one's family has shoes on their feet, even if there are 1,000 pairs. The literature on corruption not only outlines a number of consequences, it also diagnoses the problem and offers a number of solutions. One well-known diagnosis is offered by Robert Klitgaard, to whom Wiki refers as the world's leading expert on corruption. Klitgaard tells us that corruption is basically a function of three things: monopoly, discretion, and a lack of accountability. Thus, to fight corruption, it is necessary to eliminate monopoly, reduce discretion, and improve accountability. 3 central strategies are then identified in light of this diagnosis of the problem. These are referred to as control, exit, and voice strategies. Control strategies focus on, well, controlling corruption. This is done through the establishment, monitoring, and maintenance of a variety of institutions, including courts of law, police, government inspectors, and the like. The idea here is to eliminate discretion and improve accountability. Exit strategies are premised on the provision of choice, the idea being that by providing a variety of options, citizens need not rely on those goods and services being provided only by corrupt officials. The point here is to reduce any existing monopolies. Exit strategies are premised on the provision of choice, the idea being that by voice strategies are a third type, and these focus on the empowerment of the citizenry, whether through the provision of vibrant and working media, the right to assemble and protest, whistleblowing protection, or an independent government ombudsperson. Like control strategies, discretion is reduced and accountability is improved. In one way, it was surprising in our review of the literature to find that there was a strong orientation toward exit strategies, market solutions in essence, though I suppose it shouldn't have been so surprising given that so much of this research is rooted in economic theory. While not disputing the benefits of choice or increased options for citizens, we did see it as rather problematic that no real justification or evidence exists as to why this is the preferred strategy. And with the mounting evidence demonstrating the ill-conceived nature of imposing structural adjustment programs and general policies of privatization, deregulation, and liberalization on developing countries, we began thinking that perhaps the problem was in the framing of corruption itself as an economic problem involving primarily public sector actors. The theory, we began to think, pointed towards a specific solution, as if by defining corruption a certain way, the conclusion has almost become foregone. This is to say we have some serious limitations to viewing corruption from just one orthodox perspective. Indeed, one does need to ask the private questions about how the private sector is necessarily less oriented toward monopoly and discretion, and how it is necessarily more accountable. This sector is, after all, called the private sector for a reason. Regarding the transparency and accountability of the private sector, consider the case of BAE Systems, one of Britain's major arms and weapons manufacturers. Currently, BAE is embroiled in a controversy involving a number of public officials from Saudi Arabia, one of whom, it seems, has been repeatedly accepting kickbacks out of a £60 million sterling slush fund administered by the company. Similar practices by the company appear to be widespread, and these include payments to Chile's notorious Augusto Pinochet. The point to be made here is that corruption involves both a giver and a taker, a demand side and a supply side, to put it in economic terms. Moreover, I wonder if the way corruption is being framed and defined in the literature is not also undermining or underplaying the important role of corporate and other private actors, such as those employed by BAE Systems. This is not to say that the private sector has been ignored by those fighting corruption. The American 1977 Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the OECD's 1998 Anti-Bribery Treaty both squarely take aim at the private sector. Though it does need to be highlighted that despite the good intentions that have gone into this legislation, neither of these acts or treaties are being enforced in any substantive way. If you doubt what I'm saying, have a look at the BAE Systems case, as it clearly demonstrates the difficulty of enforcing these treaties. Corruption is, however, not just about bribery and kickbacks, and there's something about the term corruption that is not only encompassing, but also moral or ethical. And I would like to move away from a strictly economic understanding of the term to suggest an alternative way of thinking about, or really defining it. I'm particularly interested in the OED's second definition of corruption. That definition asks us to consider that the consequences of corruption might involve more than just the undermining of some abstract idea of economic growth. Rather, we need to see it resulting in consequences that we ourselves both understand and have at times personally experienced, consequences such as hunger and violence.